Hello, welcome to episode 5. And as you may have noticed, I'm in the same clothes as episode 4 because I'm doing a 2-in-1 day. How mad is that? Today I want to talk about the thing that's on everyone's mind when they think about Johannesburg, and that is safety. We'll talk briefly about how it feels like to live here. I was here for 6 weeks, and also about sort of the precautions you take here. And yeah, let's just start from there and see like where it goes really. So for today, I've just got some generic tracking shots of Johannesburg, a few of the activities I did around. I might break from my commentary to talk a bit about the stuff on the video. Starting off, first things first to say, it's safe. I think that's the main thing I want to stress here is that during my whole 6 weeks, I never once felt unsafe in Johannesburg. And in my opinion, I think the reputation is probably worse than it is. I think many places in the world are unsafe. Like I come from London, for instance, and there are many parts of London that I would definitely feel unsafe in at night. Another city that springs to mind is Paris, and Paris is the actually the only city that I've ever been the victim of crime in. And it wasn't even me; it was my mum when I was 10 years old. But I remember that feeling a lot. And I think in Paris as well, like at night, you can definitely feel unsafe, especially around the Gare du Nord station. And so it's just one of those strange things why Johannesburg is the reputation sort of supersedes everything else and drowns out all of the positive aspects of the city. Yeah. Because I think Johannesburg is a beautiful city with so much to do and so much to offer to people coming to visit. But whenever anyone thinks of Johannesburg, they think of the danger, and it always makes them paranoid before they arrive, which ultimately is detrimental to the experience that you get here. However, having said that, I think the reason that Johannesburg does have a bad reputation is because the violence, the nature of the violence that happens here is definitely a very foreign concept to a lot of Western minds. Even in say London, where there are quite a lot of stabbings, here there are a hell of a lot of stabbings and a hell of a lot more than you will ever see in London. So I think the level of violence is much higher than you would expect. So, having said that, I think the thing to talk about is when it comes to precautions in regards to your own safety. First things first, and by far the most important, is where you're staying. And I had the pleasure of staying with Christine Lukakis, who's on the university list for elective students in trauma. And it was one of the best experiences I had was living at hers because it was dedicated for elective students and it was a complex of houses. So there's up to 10 to 12 elective students there. So you always had someone to go to Bara with and come back with, and you always had people to do social stuff with, so you weren't doing stuff by yourself. It also had features such as a high wall around the entire housing complex. It also had electric fencing at the top of the walls. It also had a gate, electric gate letting cars in and out. And on top of that, it was linked to a security company that, if the alarm was triggered, the security company would call up and ask, is everything okay? Otherwise, they would send the security team there. And you'll find that a lot of South African families, especially the middle class, upper class, will take these precautions in Johannesburg. The second thing that was really reassuring about the accommodation I was living in was that the landlord lived literally next door, and that was reassuring because it's good to know that the locals also live in this area, and it's not just an area that's just close to Bara, but you're sort of left on your own. So that was really nice, and having that local contact made a world of difference in terms of having that local knowledge about where's good to go, where's not good to go, what kind of precautions we need to do, and just having someone in South Africa who's always looking out for you, being your family away from family. And I think that really made the experience that much more reassuring in my mind. The third thing that sort of follows on from my second point is knowing where to go is important because in Johannesburg it's quite strange and it's the only city I've ever noticed this is that you can have somewhere that feels completely safe. You see lots and lots of tourists, you see lots and lots of locals. It seems like a very trendy area, and then literally around the corner it can feel incredibly unsafe. And it's this sort of dichotomy in the city that is always there. Like you can literally go from road to road and it can feel completely different. And that's why I think it's, especially for me anyway, it was not worth the risk to be like, oh, let's walk from A to B. I think it's always better to go via car. So either Uber or either driving is the safest way to navigate around the city. And on that note about the roads here, before I came, I was told that the roads were very like unsafe. It's quite dangerous. The driving's quite erratic here. But I actually didn't get any of that impression here, and I really, really enjoyed driving here more so than even in the UK because I found the roads were really good. The motorways were excellent. There were definitely fewer potholes out here. It's left-hand drive, so for someone from the UK, it's perfect. And also, it was the driving wasn't as erratic as I thought it would be. Um, but the thing to note about driving that everyone does is so leave about a car length gap when stopped, so you have room to maneuver should you need it. The other thing is always lock your car doors, and you tend not to keep your windows down. Because you also find that at every traffic light there are always people on the roads. Most of them are just trying to get some small change, because it's their only means of making a living. But obviously you don't want to take that risk in case they're able to like reach their hand in and try and grab something or grab you. And the other thing to note about driving is that red lights. If you ever feel unsafe, then everyone always says just go through that red light. If there's no traffic coming, then go through it. On the flip side, you'll realize that red lights here can be quite optional for a lot of the people here. So be careful of people speeding through red lights when you're turning. And the next point to mention really is that day and night are totally different beasts, as you would expect. And so areas that are very safe during the day can be very unsafe at night. And I think that's something you always have to bear in mind. So, for instance, Soweto, during the day you can go do a bike tour there. And funnily enough, the safest time I ever felt in Johannesburg was actually on a bike in Soweto with the local tour guides. But obviously at night, I wouldn't drive through Soweto. And it's similar for other areas such as Hillbrow, where Constitution Hill is. During the day, you'll go there as a tourist attraction, but at night, I would definitely avoid it. And it's these kinds of things that you just need to know about, so you're not sort of driving around at night and not realizing where you are, and the risk, of course, of getting lost. I think the final point to say before I do my wrap up bit is something that's quite peculiar about Johannesburg is that actually the city centre is probably the most dangerous part of the city. And it's a strange thing because you would think the city centre would be the safest, but in Johannesburg it's different. And so definitely avoid the city centre, especially at rush hour, because at rush hour obviously there's a risk you get trapped. So I think to wrap up this video, I just wanted to finish by saying the most obvious thing, which is to apply your common sense whenever you're traveling, wherever you are in the world. And I think all of us have it. Whenever you travel somewhere, you take more safety precautions than when you're at home. And so simple things like not walking around with your phone out, not flashing any valuables, walking in groups, that kind of thing will always keep you in good stead. I think with Johannesburg, there's a risk that you let the paranoia take over and you end up not enjoying it because you're always paranoid about, oh, I can't do this or I can't do this. And definitely when I first came, I had that paranoia a lot. And then towards the end, it eased off a bit, and I was a lot more sort of knowledgeable about the my own safety. But obviously, there's that risk as well that you don't want to get too comfortable and then something can happen. I think another thing to say is that a lot of people I find can play up the danger. They'll tell you lots of horror stories and they'll freak people out. And I've purposefully tried not to tell any horror stories because to me, I just think horror stories don't really benefit anyone. Apart from just like reiterating that bad things can happen. But I think also a lot of people who come back like to tell horror stories of things they heard or things they heard can happen to make it sound like, oh, look at me, I went to Johannesburg and I survived. And I think it's a disservice to Johannesburg because I think it's an absolutely amazing city and it's a great place to visit and a fantastic place to work as an elective student or as a doctor. and so I don't want the sort of continuation of this reputation that Johannesburg is dangerous above all else, because it has lots of positive things, like I said. So, wrapping up this episode, hope you found something useful about it, and hopefully, see you for the next episode, which will be on apartheid.